My name is Clara Preston, and for 30 years, my husband Arthur and I poured our hearts, our souls, and every ounce of our strength into building our dream restaurant, Preston's. It was our legacy, our shared triumph, a testament to love and partnership. Or so I thought. Imagine my horror, my absolute devastation, when, on the night of our 30th wedding anniversary, in the very dining room we'd built together, Arthur raised a glass to his young mistress, our employee, and called her my guest of honor. He thought he could erase me, humiliate me in front of our children, our friends, our staff, and bleed our business dry to fund his affair. He thought I'd just fade away, a broken, discarded wife. But he forgot one crucial thing. I wasn't just his wife. I was his business partner. And I was about to serve him a taste of justice he'd never forget. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because I want you to know you're not alone if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt invisible. Stick with me, because this isn't just about heartbreak. It's about rising up, fighting back, and reclaiming what's yours. Let's dive in. Thank you for being here, for listening to my story. It means more than you know to hear from you, please. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from, what time it is there. It reminds me I'm not alone in this fight, and it fuels me to keep going. If you've got a story of your own, a moment where you faced betrayal or found your strength, email me. I've left my email in the description below. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when everything I thought I knew about my life started to unravel. For 3 decades, Arthur and I had built something extraordinary. Preston's, our little bistro, started with just 6 tables, mismatched chairs, and a dream so big it felt like it could carry us through anything. We were young, scrappy, and wildly in love, pouring every penny we had, and some we didn't, into that tiny space. I still remember the creak of the old wooden floor, the way the sunlight spilled through the front window, casting golden patches on the walls. Arthur was the charismatic front man, the visionary with a palate that could charm anyone. He'd swirl a glass of wine, tell a story, and have every patron laughing, dreaming, believing they were part of something special. And me, I was the quiet engine room, the one who made sure the numbers added up. The bills were paid, the staff was scheduled, and the hollandaise sauce Arthur was so famous for never broke. I managed the books with an iron fist, balancing every cent, negotiating with suppliers, ensuring our dream didn't collapse under the weight of our ambition. At 55, I should have been looking forward to our pearl anniversary with nothing but joy, maybe even dreaming of a leisurely retirement, sipping coffee on a porch somewhere, reminiscing about the battles we'd won together. Instead, a bitter, coppery taste of suspicion had begun to coat everything, like rust creeping into a once-perfect machine. It started so subtly, the way these things often do. Arthur, my Arthur, still 55, but suddenly dressing like a man 20 years younger, tight shirts, flashy watches, a new cologne that stung my nose grew distant. Our late-night talks, those sacred moments over a shared bottle of wine where we'd dissect the day's service or plan the next season's menu, dwindled to curt exchanges about staffing or inventory. His phone, once an afterthought, became a fortress of secrets, always angled away from me, buzzing with messages he'd answer in another room. His meetings ran later, his explanations for absences vaguer, and to my discerning ear, far too elaborate, like a story he hadn't quite rehearsed enough. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words, wondering when the man I'd loved for 3 decades had started slipping away. My heart ached, but I pushed it down, telling myself I was imagining things, that this was just a phase, that our love, our partnership, was stronger than my fears. Then came Tiffany Monroe. Arthur announced her hiring about 6 months before our anniversary, his voice dripping with a forced casualness that set my teeth on edge. "Clara, darling," he'd said, avoiding my eyes, "I've found the most marvelous young woman to handle our guest relations and special projects. Tiffany's a real dynamo, just what we need to freshen up our image." When Tiffany walked into Preston's, she was everything I wasn't 30 years old, all gleaming hair, impossibly white teeth, and dresses that cost more than our weekly produce budget. Her resume, which Arthur thrust at me with a defensive edge, was laughably thin, a summer job hosting at a beachside cafe. A vague mention of event coordination that sounded like it was made up on the spot. Her role as special projects manager seemed to involve long lunches with Arthur, liaising with potential VIP clients. But our profits showed no uptick from these supposed connections. In fact, they were bleeding, a slow, steady drip I couldn't ignore. "I've always managed the books at Preston's. It's my domain, the place where numbers tell the unvarnished truth, no matter how much charm Arthur could spin. And the numbers were telling a troubling story. Expenses labeled client development or promotional marketing were skyrocketing charges from upscale boutiques I didn't recognize, florists we didn't use, even a discreet spa on the other side of town. Cash withdrawals, larger and more frequent than ever, were attributed to supplier emergencies Arthur never explained. Our bottom line, once so robust, was weakening, a slow hemorrhage I couldn't stop. The staff noticed, too. I'd catch whispers in the kitchen, sidelong glances when Arthur ushered Tiffany into his small office for yet another strategy session. The older waitresses, women who'd been with us for years, gave me knowing, pitying looks that cut deeper than any words. Each one was a tiny paper cut, drawing blood from my already bruised heart. Tiffany, for her part, swanned around Preston's like she owned it, offering unsolicited advice on everything from the wine list to the flower arrangements, often contradicting my decisions. Arthur always backed her up, his tone dismissive. "Now, Clara, Tiffany has a fresh perspective. Let's hear her out." My attempts to discuss the financial irregularities or Tiffany's nebulous, expensive role were met with a chilling defensiveness I'd never seen from him before. "Are you questioning my business decisions?" Clara, he'd snap, his face flushing. "After all these years, Tiffany's bringing youthful energy, connections we need, you're just threatened by her. Or worse." His voice would soften, patronizing, like he was speaking to a child. "You're not seeing the bigger picture anymore. Dear, maybe you're tired. Tired I was exhausted. Tired of his evasions. Tired of Tiffany's smug, condescending smiles. Tired of the charade he was forcing us all to play. Tired of the growing certainty that my husband, the man I'd built a life and a thriving business with, was not only having an affair with this woman half his age, but was using our shared legacy, our restaurant, as his personal piggy bank to fund it. Our 30th anniversary loomed, and Arthur, in a sudden burst of sentimental enthusiasm that felt utterly false, insisted on a grand dinner at Preston's. "Of course, darling," he declared, a testament to everything we've built together. He even suggested I wear the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 20th, a piece I cherished, its soft luster a reminder of happier times. His sudden focus on us, on celebrating our journey, felt like a performance, a distraction. But for what a part of me, the foolish, hopeful part that had loved him for over 3 decades, wanted to believe this could be a turning point, a return to something real. but the businesswoman in me, the one who saw the red ink on the ledgers and the calculating glint in Tiffany's eyes whenever she looked at Arthur, knew better. The plans for the dinner grew more elaborate, driven mostly by Arthur and, I suspected, Tiffany's unseen influence. It was to be a grand affair, key patrons invited, our adult children, Michael and Eleanor, flying in. I went through the motions, discussing menus with our chef, overseeing table arrangements, all while a cold dread settled in my soul. Arthur was too jovial, Tiffany too conspicuously present in the planning, her suggestions becoming directives Arthur adopted without question. I felt like I was preparing for my own execution, not a celebration. He was planning something. I knew it. Something beyond just an anniversary dinner. The way he looked at me sometimes, when he thought I wasn't watching, was no longer with affection or even indifference, but with a strange mixture of impatience and pity, or perhaps cold assessment. Preston's had always been our shared stage, but as our anniversary approached, I had the sickening feeling Arthur was about to rewrite the script entirely, casting me in a role I'd never auditioned for, one that would strip me of everything I held dear. And Tiffany Monroe, his dynamo, would be waiting in the wings, ready for her starring role. The night of our 30th anniversary arrived, a milestone that should have shimmered with the luster of shared years, of battles won together, of a love I once believed had stood the test of time. The main dining room of Preston's was filled to capacity, the air thick with the scent of pale pink roses, my choice, one of the few details Tiffany hadn't overridden. Soft jazz, the kind Arthur and I used to sway to in our youth, drifted from hidden speakers, a cruel echo of better days. Our children, Michael and Eleanor, named after my strong-willed mother, though I feared my daughter lacked her namesake's backbone, were there with their spouses, along with Arthur's carefully curated list of business contacts and a smattering of our oldest friends, who looked increasingly bewildered by the evening's subtle but undeniable chill. I moved among them, a gracious hostess on autopilot, my smile a fragile mask threatening to crack. Arthur was in his element, expansive and charming, his arm frequently, possessively around Tiffany's waist. She was a vision in a crimson dress that screamed, "Look at me," her laughter too loud, her eyes meeting mine with a spark of ill-concealed triumph. She flitted about, acting more like the lady of the manor than an employee, while our actual staff, particularly Maria, our head waitress of 20 years, shot me looks of pained sympathy. The air was thick with unspoken truths, with the cloying scent of Arthur's betrayal. He'd given me the pearl necklace that evening, as promised, but not with the tenderness of a husband celebrating 3 decades of partnership. It was a cursory, impatient gesture, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Here you go, Clara." "Happy anniversary," he mumbled, turning immediately to answer a call on his sleek new phone, a phone I suspected was bought with restaurant funds meant for new kitchen equipment. The pearls felt cold against my skin, like a chain rather than a gift. Dinner service was impeccable, a testament to the standards I'd fought to maintain at Preston's. But the food, a special menu our chef had designed for the occasion, tasted like ash in my mouth. I watched Arthur fawning over Tiffany, refilling her champagne glass, laughing at her vapid pronouncements, while I sat at the head of our table, an increasingly isolated figurehead. Michael and Eleanor tried to engage me in conversation, but their cheerfulness felt forced, their eyes darting nervously between me, their father, and Tiffany. They knew, or at least suspected enough to be deeply uncomfortable. Then came the toasts. Michael raised his glass, his voice shaky, speaking of our enduring love words that felt like a eulogy. Eleanor, ever pragmatic, toasted to Preston's success, avoiding any mention of the marriage that underpinned it. A few old friends shared warm memories of Arthur and me in happier times, their words like salt on a raw wound. Finally, Arthur stood, tapping his glass for attention. A hush fell over the room. This was it, his moment, our moment. I held my breath. My dearest friends, esteemed colleagues, beloved family, he began, his voice smooth as vintage port, his eyes sweeping the room, deliberately avoiding mine until the last. 30 years. 30 years, Clara and I have journeyed together. A remarkable feat. Wouldn't you agree? Polite applause followed. He gave me a brief, dismissive nod. And Preston's, our shared creation, stands as a testament to perseverance. He paused, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. But as we celebrate the past, we must also embrace the future, the fresh energy, the new ideas, the inspiration that propels us forward. His gaze found Tiffany, seated near the front, practically glowing under his attention. He raised his glass higher. "Tonight," he declared, his voice ringing with a fervor I hadn't heard in years. A fervor once reserved for me, for our dreams. I want to honor someone truly special, someone whose vibrant spirit and unique contributions have brought a new light, a new passion, not just to our business, but to my life. He beamed at Tiffany, who blushed and lowered her gaze, though her eyes glittered with triumph. My blood ran cold. No, he wouldn't. Not here, not now. So, I ask you all to raise your glasses with me, Arthur boomed, his eyes finally locking onto mine, a small, victorious smile on his lips. To Miss Tiffany Monroe, a woman of extraordinary talent and vision, someone whose presence has become indispensable. My true muse, my guiding star, and tonight, my very special guest of honor, and Clara's too, I'm sure. The room plunged into a stunned, suffocating silence. A dropped fork clinked like a gunshot. Every eye was on me, some pitying, some horrified, some morbidly curious. My face burned as if he'd struck me. My husband, on our 30th anniversary, in our own restaurant, surrounded by our children, friends, and staff, had publicly elevated his mistress to a place of honor, effectively erasing me, his wife of 3 decades. He hadn't just introduced her, he'd anointed her, his words a declaration of my demotion, my irrelevance. Tiffany basked in the spotlight, offering a demure wave, her eyes flicking toward me with pure triumph. The staff looked aghast. Maria met my gaze, tears welling before looking away. Michael and Eleanor seemed to want the floor to swallow them. I don't know how I survived the rest of that hideous evening. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, the stench of betrayal. Laughter was gone, replaced by hushed, awkward whispers. The food turned to cardboard. Arthur, oblivious or uncaring, continued playing the magnanimous host, fawning over Tiffany while I sat, a frozen statue of humiliation, my pearl necklace a noose around my neck. When the last guest departed, leaving a room heavy with the debris of a celebration turned wake, I stood alone amidst the wreckage. An old saying came to mind: empires crumble from within, from corruption, arrogance, betrayal. Arthur had proven it true. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed everything we'd built. But as I looked at the empty tables, the wilting roses, a cold, unyielding resolve formed in my heart. He thought he'd erased me. He was about to learn I was far from finished. The drive home was a suffocating shroud. Arthur hummed a jaunty tune, the same one Tiffany had giggled at, oblivious or indifferent to the chasm he'd blasted through our lives. I said nothing what was there to say. He'd made his pronouncement, his public anointing of his mistress, his casual erasure of me. I was no longer his wife, his partner, the co-builder of Preston's. I was a ghost, a relic he was consigning to the past. Our children had offered stammered goodbyes, unable to meet my eyes, fleeing as quickly as possible, leaving me to endure the silent drive with the architect of my disgrace. At home, a house now as cold and alien as Arthur. He poured himself a brandy, still humming. "Well," he said, his false joviality making my skin crawl. "I think that went rather well. Don't you, Tiffany was a hit? Adds a certain sparkle." I didn't respond. I walked past him, up the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now. I silently corrected and locked the door. Fury, a cold, diamond-hard rage, pushed through the shock and devastation. This wasn't just about a cheating husband. This was about a business partner brazenly destroying what we'd built, siphoning its lifeblood for his tawdry affair, expecting me to fade away. He thought me weak, a 55-year-old woman easily discarded. He'd forgotten who I was, Clara Preston, who'd balanced the books from our kitchen table in the early days, negotiated with tough suppliers when he was too artistic to bother, pored over profit and loss statements late into the night while he basked in the glow of being restaurateur Arthur Preston. He'd forgotten I was Preston's heart, mind, and meticulous financial guardian. Sleep was impossible that night. My mind, usually a calm repository of historical facts or culinary costings, was a raging inferno of calculations. Marital waste, a term I'd read in a magazine article about messy divorces, wasn't just emotional devastation, it was tangible, quantifiable theft from our shared enterprise. Tiffany's inflated salary for a non-job, client entertainment expenses tied to five-star hotels and designer boutiques, unexplained cash withdrawals. I'd noted these discrepancies for months. My queries met with Arthur's dismissive waves or accusations I was stifling creativity. Now, I understood. By dawn, my fury had focused not the wild rage of a betrayed wife, but the cold, analytical anger of a businesswoman whose partner was committing fraud. My heartbreak was a chasm that might never heal, but my professional pride, my decades of work, my stake in Preston's, those I'd fight for with every ounce of strength and intellect. I didn't confront Arthur again. What was the point? He'd shown his lack of remorse, his disrespect. Instead, I went to my home office, a small, neat room he rarely entered, dismissing it as my boring paperwork den. That den became my war room. For years, I'd kept duplicate copies of key financial records, a habit born of meticulousness, not suspicion. Now, they were my arsenal. I spread them out: profit and loss statements, supplier invoices, payroll records, credit card statements for the business accounts Arthur controlled. I started a new ledger, private, just for this. My pen moved with relentless precision, cross-referencing, highlighting, calculating. The patterns of his deceit, once subtle anxieties, leaped from the pages with glaring clarity. Tiffany's salary, for a guest relations manager who rarely related to anyone but Arthur, was double our experienced maitre d's. Promotional trips to wine regions coincided with Tiffany's Instagram posts from luxury spa resorts. Emergency supplier payments in cash had no invoices. Our dream was being bled dry to fund his midlife crisis and her expensive tastes. The more I uncovered, the colder, more resolute I became. This wasn't just an affair, it was systematic theft, a deliberate dismantling of our shared future for his selfish gratification. He hadn't just humiliated me, he'd defrauded me. By the end of that first day, I knew two things with certainty: my marriage was over, irrevocably shattered, and Arthur Preston wasn't going to destroy our life's work. He'd called me his guest of honor supporter. He was about to face a co-owner who'd audited the devastating cost of his betrayal. My next step was clear. I needed the best divorce lawyer in the city, someone who specialized in unraveling financial deceptions and fighting for a wronged partner's share. Arthur thought he had all the power, all the sparkle. He was about to learn the unyielding power of documented truth. The days following that night were a blur of cold fury and meticulous work. Arthur carried on as if nothing had happened, parading Tiffany around Preston's with an even more pronounced air of ownership, while I, his wife and co-founder, became a ghost in my own establishment, a silent observer watching him bleed our legacy dry. But my silence wasn't born of shock or fear. It was the calculated quiet of a predator stalking its prey. My home office, once a sanctuary for menu planning, transformed into a war room. My years of managing the restaurant's finances, scrutinizing every invoice, balancing every ledger, now served a grim purpose. I delved into the accounts with a historian's precision and a wronged woman's thirst for truth. The evidence of Arthur's profligacy and deceit, particularly regarding Tiffany, was more damning than my worst suspicions. Her salary, under the ludicrous title of Director of Ambiance and Client Experience, a role Arthur invented on the spot, was nearly triple our head chef's, a man with decades of experience and critical acclaim. Her expense reports, rubber-stamped by Arthur, were a litany of designer boutique purchases, new uniforms for client-facing roles. He'd vaguely explained spa treatments essential for a stress-free client interface, and 5-star hotel stays in nearby cities for networking opportunities that never yielded a single new corporate account. Credit card statements for the business account Arthur controlled showed a hemorrhage of funds, extravagant dinners at rival restaurants with Tiffany as his only client, jewelry store charges listed as corporate gifts, payments to a luxury car lease company for a vehicle I'd never seen used for restaurant business. It was all there, a sickening trail of marital funds diverted to support his affair and Tiffany's lavish lifestyle. He wasn't just cheating, he was defrauding the business we'd poured our lives into, jeopardizing its future and mine. Each uncovered transaction, each falsified expense, added ice to my resolve. After 2 weeks of intense, secret auditing, compiling spreadsheets, cross-referencing receipts with Tiffany's boastful social media posts, she wasn't discreet about her good fortune. I had a dossier thick enough to choke a horse. It was time for the next step. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone formidable who specialized in contentious divorces and unraveling financial deceptions. My research led me to Diane Warren, a name whispered with respect and a touch of fear in legal circles. She was known for her sharp intellect, meticulous preparation, and refusal to be intimidated. Her hourly fee was astronomical, but looking at the figures Arthur had siphoned, I considered it an investment in my survival. I made the appointment under an assumed name, a precaution against Arthur finding out prematurely. Walking into Diane Warren's sleek, modern office, I felt a mix of trepidation and empowerment. She was exactly as described, impeccably dressed, her gaze direct and analytical, exuding quiet, confident authority. I laid out my story, starting with the public humiliation at our anniversary dinner, Arthur's defiant confirmation of his affair, and the core of my findings, the meticulously documented financial hemorrhage from our restaurant to fund Tiffany. I presented my spreadsheets, highlighted credit card statements, copies of Tiffany's flimsy employment contract versus her actual non-duties. Even discreetly obtained photos of Arthur and Tiffany on a business trip that looked suspiciously like a romantic getaway. Miss Warren listened intently, her expression unreadable at first, occasionally asking sharp, pertinent questions, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she leaned back, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "Mrs. Preston," she said, her voice calm, but with a current of steel. "Your husband is not just an adulterer. He is, by the evidence you've presented, a remarkably foolish and brazen embezzler of marital assets. Your meticulous record-keeping is extraordinary. This isn't just grounds for divorce, it's a clear case of significant dissipation of assets and potentially corporate malfeasance." A wave of validation washed over me. I wasn't just a jealous, overwrought wife, I was a defrauded business partner. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice steady. "Our first step," Ms. Warren explained, "is to file for divorce, citing adultery and irreconcilable differences. Simultaneously, we'll file a motion to freeze all marital assets, including business accounts, to prevent further dissipation. We'll petition for a full forensic accounting of the restaurant, going back several years. We'll make a strong claim for an unequal distribution of assets in your favor to compensate for the funds he's wasted on Miss Monroe. And Mrs. Preston," she added, her eyes meeting mine, "given your integral role in building and managing Preston's and his gross mismanagement, we'll fight for you to gain controlling interest, if not sole ownership, of the restaurant." Sole ownership. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. Preston's without Arthur was almost unimaginable. Yet the alternative, letting him run it into the ground while flaunting his affair, was worse. "And Tiffany Monroe?" I asked. "Once we establish clear financial misconduct involving her employment and benefits, her position at the restaurant will become legally untenable, especially if you gain control," Ms. Warren said coolly. "Consider her a liability that will be managed." I took a deep breath. The path ahead would be a battle, ugly and painful. Arthur would fight, furious and vindictive. But for the first time since that horrible dinner, I felt genuine hope. I had truth on my side, meticulously documented, and I had Diane Warren. "Ms. Warren," I said, meeting her gaze with newfound resolve, "proceed. I want to fight for everything I've worked for, everything he's tried to take from me." She nodded, a glint of admiration in her eyes. "Excellent. Mrs. Preston, let's discuss strategy. It's crucial your husband remains unaware for as long as possible. We need to prepare our filings meticulously before he can hide further assets or retaliate." So began the next phase of my secret war. Outwardly, I played the subdued, heartbroken wife, enduring Arthur's presence at Preston's, his casual cruelties, his ongoing affair with Tiffany. But inwardly, I was a woman preparing for battle, armed with evidence, guided by legal expertise, fueled by righteous fury. The countdown to serving Arthur his just deserts had begun. The weeks following my consultation with Miss Warren were a strange duality. To the outside world, especially Arthur and Tiffany, I was still Clara Preston, the quietly grieving, diminished wife. I continued my duties at Preston's, a ghost at their arrogant feast. My polite smiles and subdued demeanor a carefully constructed facade. Tiffany swanned about, her director of ambiance title a daily insult. Arthur signed off on her ludicrous expenses with a flourish. They had no idea that each evening, in the solitude of my home office, I was a general plotting her campaign, reviewing documents with Ms. Warren's paralegal, preparing for the first volley. Ms. Warren was a marvel of efficiency and steely resolve. With my input, She drafted a divorce petition so thorough, so damning, detailing Arthur's adultery, his calculated public humiliation, the evidence of a slap he'd delivered in rage, and the systematic dissipation of our marital assets through the restaurant to fund his affair, that it read like a prosecutor's closing argument. A forensic accountant, engaged by Ms. Warren, confirmed my findings and unearthed even more instances of Arthur's financial recklessness benefiting Tiffany. The day to serve Arthur was chosen with precision, a busy Friday afternoon at Preston's, after the lunch rush but before evening preparations. Arthur was in his element, schmoozing patrons at the bar. Tiffany draped decoratively nearby, laughing too loudly at his tired jokes. I was in the back office, ostensibly reviewing invoices, my heart a frantic drum. Ms. Warren advised I not be present for the service to avoid confrontation. A discreet process server, built like a polite but immovable oak, entered the restaurant. I heard Maria gasp softly, then a sharp silence fell over the bar area. Maria later recounted it, her eyes wide. The server approached Arthur, calmly stated his name, and handed him a thick envelope. Arthur, annoyed at the interruption, took it, a confused frown on his face. As he scanned the first page, the color drained from his cheeks, replaced by a ghastly pallor. Tiffany, sensing drama, peered over his shoulder, her perfectly made-up face contorting in disbelief, then fury. "What is this nonsense? Arthur!" she reportedly shrieked, loud enough for patrons and staff to hear. "She's suing you for what?" Arthur, for once, was speechless, staring at the papers like they were a venomous snake. The server, his duty done, walked out. The fallout was a contained explosion. Arthur stormed into the main office, not mine, demanding to know where I was, ranting about betrayal and scheming old women. I wasn't there. I'd slipped out the back, as per Ms. Warren's instructions, and was safely at my sister's house. The days that followed brought furious, incoherent voicemails from Arthur, threats, pathetic gaslighting. "You're confused, Clara, and please to stop this madness." Tiffany, I heard, was beside herself, her position at the restaurant under threat, her access to Arthur's expense account likely frozen by Miss Warren's swift court orders. The legal battle began with depositions. Miss Warren warned they'd be unpleasant, and she was right. Arthur's lawyer, a slick, aggressive man chosen for his bullying, tried to paint me as a bitter, jealous, incompetent old woman destroying a successful man out of spite. But Ms. Warren, with icy calm and rapier-sharp intellect, dismantled him. She presented my meticulous records, the forensic accountant's damning report, my unwavering testimony about the anniversary humiliation and the slap. Arthur's deposition was a disaster for him. Under Ms. Warren's relentless questioning, his bluster crumbled. He contradicted himself, couldn't explain Tiffany's extravagant expenses, and his claim of being Preston's sole genius fell apart against years of records showing my fiscal prudence. Tiffany's deposition was illuminating, dressed in borrowed finery, her accounts likely under scrutiny. She struggled to articulate her job duties, qualifications, or why her client meetings occurred at luxury spas or international resorts. Under oath, her facade of a dynamic professional dissolved, revealing a shallow, grasping opportunist. Long-term staff, encouraged by Ms. Warren's team and finally safe to speak, provided affidavits detailing the blatant affair, Tiffany's unprofessional behavior, and Arthur's misuse of restaurant resources to impress her. Word of the scandalous divorce and fraud accusations leaked into the restaurant community and Arthur's social circle. The rich friends he'd humiliated me to impress now gave him a wide berth. His world, built on deceit and my hard work, was burning. The stress was getting to him. He looked haggard, his suits ill-fitting, his charm replaced by a hunted, desperate look. I focused on the restaurant, what was left after his plundering. With Arthur's spending curtailed by court order and Tiffany barred from the premises pending the divorce, I began, with Ms. Warren and my loyal staff, the painstaking process of damage control, salvaging the business I loved. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, but each small victory, each piece of evidence bringing the truth to light, strengthened my resolve. He'd called me nothing without him. He was about to learn just how much this nothing could take. The final judgment approached, and I felt a grim, steely anticipation. Justice, like a well-prepared meal, was best served thoroughly. The final day in court was the culmination of a lifetime condensed into agonizing hours. I sat beside Ms. Warren, hands clasped tightly, back straight despite the weariness in my bones. Arthur was across the aisle, a shadow of his arrogant self, his suit hanging loosely, face pale, avoiding my gaze. Tiffany was nowhere to be seen, her role in this drama mercifully over after her testimony exposed her as a greedy opportunist. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Judge Harrison, stern but with eyes that missed nothing, reviewed the final submissions. She'd listened through weeks of testimony, the meticulous financial records, the damning evidence of lavish spending on Tiffany, the painful recounting of the anniversary humiliation, the quiet testimony about Arthur's slap. Finally, she looked up, her gaze resting on Arthur. Then me. "This court," she began, her voice clear, "has reviewed extensive evidence pertaining to the dissolution of the marriage of Clara Preston and Arthur Preston and the division of marital assets, including the jointly owned business known as Preston's." She summarized Arthur's affair, his cruel public humiliation of me, and, her voice sharpening, the documented dissipation of marital assets to support his extramarital relationship. She noted my substantial contributions to Preston's and contrasted them with Arthur's gross financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. She acknowledged the physical abuse. My breath hitched. This was it. "Given Mr. Preston's egregious conduct," the judge continued, "his sustained pattern of adultery, the profound emotional distress and public humiliation inflicted upon Mrs. Preston, and particularly the substantial marital waste proven to have been funneled from their shared business for non-marital purposes, this court finds it necessary to make an unequal distribution of assets to achieve an equitable outcome." Arthur slumped in his chair. "Therefore," Judge Harrison declared, her gaze firm, "the divorce is granted. A permanent restraining order is issued prohibiting Mr. Preston from contacting or approaching Mrs. Preston. Regarding the primary marital asset, the restaurant known as Preston's, in light of Mr. Preston's demonstrated financial irresponsibility and misuse of business funds, and to compensate Mrs. Preston for the significant assets dissipated, the court awards sole ownership and all controlling interest of the restaurant business, including all its assets and liabilities, to Mrs. Clara Preston." A gasp escaped me. Sole ownership, not just control, but everything. My restaurant, my life's work. Tears welled, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief and vindicated joy. The judge outlined that Arthur would receive a minimal settlement from smaller joint assets, barely enough to keep him afloat, certainly not enough for the lavish lifestyle he'd enjoyed at my expense. His reputation, already in tatters, was sealed by the judge's public condemnation. Arthur's reaction was defeated rage, his face ashen, eyes darting wildly, before settling on me with impotent fury. But there was nothing he could do. The gavel fell, metaphorically and almost literally, on his life of deceit. The first thing I did as sole proprietor of Clara's at Preston Place, yes, I changed the name to mark the new era, was instruct my new restaurant manager, Maria, promoted with a significant raise, to issue Tiffany her final paycheck and termination letter, effective immediately. I heard she didn't take it well, but her theatrics were no longer my concern. Walking back into my restaurant that afternoon was like breathing fresh air after years in a smoky room. The staff, who'd endured months of tension, greeted me with genuine smiles and quiet support. There was a new energy, a palpable liberation. The weeks that followed were filled with hard, joyful work. I pored over the books, not to find betrayal, but to strategize, rebuild, infuse Clara's at Preston Place with my vision, my values. I reconnected with old suppliers Arthur had dismissed, brought back customer favorites he'd disdained, and focused on quality, integrity, and a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The scars of Arthur's betrayal would always be there, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. But they no longer defined me. I was Clara Preston, restaurateur, survivor, a 55-year-old woman who'd faced her husband's public humiliation and financial ruin and had triumphed. My truth, I suppose, is that the most devastating betrayals can forge unshakable strength. Knowing your worth and fighting for it with every ounce of intelligence and resolve is the most satisfying victory. The restaurant thrived, and for the first time in a long time, so did I. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt betrayed or invisible, know this: you are enough, and you can fight back. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your own story. Hit that like button if this moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and triumph. Let's build a community of strength together. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.